The night began like every other night at St. Augustine Medical Center. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the emergency wing. The clock above the nurses' station showed a little past 11. Most of the hallways were quiet, lit only by the pale glow of overhead lights and the steady blink of monitors. Elena Reyes stood near the supply room, folding a stack of clean sheets. She was 43 years old, with tired eyes that still held a quiet kindness, and hands that moved with the calm confidence of someone who had done this work for a very long time. 11 years to be exact. 11 years of night shifts, of quiet rooms, of patients who came and went, some who got better, and a few who did not. Nobody at the hospital knew much about Elena. She was polite, always on time, never complained, and never asked for recognition. She ate her lunch alone in the break room, usually with a book in one hand. She was the kind of person who blended into the background so easily that most people forgot she was even there. But Elena did not mind. She had chosen this life for her own reasons, reasons she rarely shared with anyone. That night, everything changed in an instant. The doors of the emergency room burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher with a man who was barely conscious. His uniform was torn and soaked with blood. A badge on his chest read General Marcus Whitfield, a name that made several staff members freeze for half a second before snapping back into action. Gunshot wound to the abdomen, blood pressure dropping fast, one paramedic shouted. Within seconds, the emergency room transformed into a storm of motion. Doctors called out orders, nurses rushed to gather supplies, machines beeped in warning. The overhead lights seemed to grow brighter as the entire trauma team surrounded the general, fighting to keep him alive. Elena was not part of the main trauma team that night. Her job was to assist wherever she was needed, to fetch supplies, to check vitals in the recovery area, to be the quiet support system that kept the hospital running smoothly. But something made her walk toward the trauma bay instead of turning away. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was the years of experience that had trained her eyes to notice things other people missed. She stood near the edge of the room, watching as the surgeons worked quickly to stop the bleeding from the general's abdomen. The wound was serious, but the team seemed to have it under control. And yet, something about the way the general's skin looked near his collarbone caught her attention. It was a strange shade, slightly darker than the rest of his skin, almost like a bruise forming beneath the surface. Most people in that room were focused entirely on the wound they could see. The bleeding from his stomach was the obvious danger, the one printed clearly for everyone to react to. But Elena had learned, over many years of quiet observation, that the human body often hides its worst secrets in the places nobody thinks to look. She stepped closer, careful not to interrupt the doctors, who were already under enormous pressure. She studied the faint discoloration for a moment longer, comparing it in her mind to similar cases she had witnessed years before. It was subtle, so subtle that even trained eyes could miss it in the chaos of an emergency. But Elena had seen this pattern before, back when she worked in a smaller hospital early in her career. It usually meant one thing: internal bleeding, somewhere deeper, somewhere hidden. She took a breath and stepped forward. "Doctor," she said, her voice steady despite the noise around her. "Check his collarbone area. I think there may be internal bleeding there too." The lead surgeon, Dr. Patel, glanced up briefly, his hands still working on the visible wound. For a moment, it looked like he might dismiss her words entirely. The room was already overwhelmed, and every second counted, but something in Elena's calm certainty made him pause. "Get me a scan of that area, now," he ordered one of the technicians. Within minutes, the imaging confirmed what Elena had suspected. There was a second injury, one that had been completely hidden beneath the surface, quietly threatening to take the general's life, while everyone focused on the wound they could see. If it had gone unnoticed for even a little longer, the outcome might have been very different. "She's right," the technician said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "There's significant bleeding near the upper chest. We need to address this immediately." The trauma team shifted their focus, working quickly to stop the newly discovered bleeding while continuing to stabilize the wound on his abdomen. The surgery that followed lasted nearly 6 hours. Every person in that room fought with everything they had, refusing to let the general slip away. Elena stayed nearby for as long as she could, offering support wherever needed, before finally being called away to attend to other patients. By the time the sun began to rise, the surgery was complete. General Whitfield was alive, stable, and resting in the intensive care unit. The exhausted surgical team stepped out into the hallway, removing their gloves and masks, relief evident on their tired faces. Word of what had happened during the surgery spread quickly through the hospital. By the time the hospital director, Dr. Harold Simmons, arrived that morning, the entire staff was already talking about it. A general, one of the most respected military leaders in the region, had nearly lost his life to an injury that almost went unnoticed. And somehow, against all odds, someone had caught it in time. Dr. Simmons gathered the trauma team in the hallway outside the recovery room. He was a serious man, known for his high standards and his belief that excellence should always be recognized. He looked around at the tired faces of the doctors and nurses who had spent the night fighting for the general's life. "I want to know exactly what happened in there," Dr. Simmons said. "Who saved the general?" There was a brief pause. The doctors exchanged glances, each one hesitant to take credit for what had truly been a team effort. Dr. Patel, the lead surgeon, finally spoke up. "We did our part," he said honestly. "But if it weren't for one person noticing something we all missed, the general might not have made it. We were so focused on the obvious wound that we almost missed the internal bleeding near his collarbone. She caught it before it was too late." "Who caught it?" Dr. Simmons asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Slowly, one by one, the members of the trauma team turned their heads. Not toward each other, but toward the back of the small crowd gathered in the hallway. There, quietly standing near the wall, almost as if she wished to disappear into it, was Elena Reyes. Dr. Simmons studied her for a long moment, recognition slowly forming on his face. "Nurse Reyes," he said finally. "You are the one who noticed it?" Elena nodded slightly, her hands folded in front of her. "I just saw something that didn't look right," she said simply. "I mentioned it to Dr. Patel, that's all." "That's all?" Dr. Simmons repeated, a note of disbelief in his voice. "You may have just saved the life of one of the most important men in this region, and you say that's all?" Elena did not know how to respond. She had never been comfortable with praise, had never sought recognition for the quiet work she did every single day. She simply shrugged, her cheeks slightly flushed from the sudden attention. "I was just doing my job," she said softly. "I pay attention. That's what nurses are supposed to do." Dr. Simmons shook his head slowly, a strange mixture of admiration and something close to shame crossing his face. 11 years, he murmured, almost to himself. "You've worked here for 11 years, and I don't think I ever properly learned your name until this morning." The hallway fell silent for a moment. It was a small statement, but it carried a heavy weight. How many people, Dr. Simmons wondered, walked through these halls every single day, doing extraordinary work without anyone ever truly seeing them? Over the following days, General Whitfield's condition continued to improve. The hospital staff monitored him closely, and slowly but surely, his strength began to return. He asked questions about his surgery, about the details of that difficult night, and eventually, he learned about the quiet nurse who had noticed what everyone else had missed. He requested to see her. Elena was hesitant at first. She was not used to this kind of attention, and the idea of meeting the general personally made her nervous in a way that surprised her. But eventually, she agreed, mostly because the head nurse insisted it would be rude to decline his request. She found him sitting up in his hospital bed, looking far healthier than he had the night he arrived. His face, though still marked with the exhaustion of recovery, held a calm strength that seemed fitting for a man who had led soldiers through difficult times. "You must be Nurse Reyes," he said as she entered the room, his voice warm despite its rough edges. "I've been wanting to meet you." "General Whitfield," Elena said, offering a small, respectful nod. "I'm glad to see you're doing better." "Better because of you, from what I understand," he said, gesturing toward the chair beside his bed. "Please, sit if you have a moment." Elena hesitated, but eventually took the seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The general studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand how someone so quiet could have played such an important role in his survival. "They tell me you're the one who noticed the second injury," he said, "the one nobody else caught." "I just paid attention," Elena replied, echoing the same words she had used with Dr. Simmons days earlier. Sometimes small details matter more than the big, obvious ones. The general nodded slowly, considering her words. In my years of service, he said, I've commanded thousands of soldiers. I've seen brave men run into danger without hesitation. But do you know what I've learned is the rarest quality of all? Elena shook her head, curious despite herself. Attention, he said simply. Real attention. Not the kind that comes from following orders, but the kind that comes from truly caring about the person in front of you. It's easy to look at someone and see only what you expect to see. It's much harder to look closely enough to notice what others miss. Elena felt a small, unfamiliar warmth in her chest at his words. She had spent so many years quietly doing her work, never expecting recognition, never seeking praise. To hear someone speak so genuinely about the value of what she did touched her in a way she had not anticipated. Thank you, she said softly. That means more than you know. Before she left the room that day, the general reached for her hand and shook it firmly, a gesture of deep respect and gratitude. You saved my life, Nurse Reyes, he said. I won't forget that. And I don't think this hospital should either. True to his word, General Whitfield made sure that Elena's contribution was formally recognized. A small ceremony was held weeks later, attended by hospital staff, a few local officials, and the general himself, still recovering, but strong enough to stand for the occasion. Elena stood at the front of the room, uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful for the acknowledgement nonetheless. Dr. Simmons spoke first, praising the trauma team for their tireless work and dedication. But when he turned to address Elena directly, his voice softened. For 11 years, this woman has walked these halls, quietly caring for our patients without ever asking for recognition, he said. She has taught all of us an important lesson. Sometimes, the people who matter most are the ones we overlook simply because they never demand our attention. Today, we make sure that changes. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in a long while, Elena allowed herself a genuine smile. It was not the attention itself that moved her, but the realization that her quiet dedication had truly mattered, that the small, careful choices she made every single day had the power to change someone's life completely. From that day forward, things were different at St. Augustine Medical Center. The staff no longer walked past Elena without a warm greeting. Younger nurses began seeking her guidance, eager to learn from someone who had proven that careful observation could be just as powerful as any medical skill. Elena, in turn, embraced her new role as a mentor, sharing the lessons she had learned over more than a decade of quiet service. General Whitfield fully recovered and eventually returned to his duties, but he never forgot the quiet nurse who had saved his life. Every year, on the anniversary of that difficult night, he sent a simple letter to St. Augustine, thanking the hospital staff and reminding them of the importance of paying attention to the people in their care. And every year, Elena read that letter with the same quiet humility she had shown from the very beginning. She never sought recognition, never wanted to be seen as extraordinary. But in one quiet moment of careful attention, she had reminded an entire hospital and a decorated general who had led thousands that true strength often comes not from loud actions, but from the silent dedication of those who simply choose to pay attention. In the end, the story of that night became more than just a moment of medical heroism. It became a lesson that spread far beyond the walls of the hospital, a reminder that the quiet ones among us, the ones who rarely speak up and never ask for praise, are often the very people who carry the greatest strength within them.